Hello and welcome to New York, welcome to the United Nations, and welcome to the interview here on France 24. Our guest today is Bilawal Bhutto. He is Pakistan's foreign minister. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I want to get an update from you about the situation in your country. We've seen those terrible floods. Is the situation finally improving?
We are still in an active disaster at the moment, unfortunately. The scale of the tragedy, the climate catastrophe in Pakistan is of truly apocalyptic and biblical proportions. We've all heard the story of Noah and the Noah's floods, where, according to the Bible, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Well, this monster monsoon that Pakistan experienced started in the mid of June and ended at the end of August. So that is sort of the extent of this devastation. Once the rains finally stopped, it left a 100-kilometer lake in the middle of my country that could be seen from space. And that body of water is still descending into the sea, and there are many, many areas that are inundated. So we're still in the rescue and relief phase of this tragedy. And the irony of this is that Pakistan produces a negligible, about 0.8% is our carbon output, but with one of the 10 most climate stress countries on the planet. And 33 million people, one seventh of our population has been affected by this tragedy. They're paying in the form of their lives and their livelihoods for a catastrophe that they didn't help create.
Right. Obviously, the UN Secretary General went there. He talked about a carnage, and he said that there was one monsoon on steroids, basically what you are saying. But obviously, this has also consequences beyond the lives that were taken, sadly, in terms of agricultural output at a time when the world is already in dire straits on this issue.
Absolutely. So this is a compounding catastrophe. It's sort of a perfect storm. We have the immediate impact of the floods, which unfortunately cost 1,500 lives, a third of which are children. Then amongst these 33 million people who've been affected, 600,000 are pregnant women that have to give birth in the next couple of months. We face the threat of an epidemic of waterborne diseases as a result. So we're going to have a health catastrophe as well. Then, as you mentioned, with 4 million hectares of standing crop damage, the potential of our next crop, the wheat crop, being unable to be planted, 1 million heads of cattle who died as a result of this floods. We've got a food security, an agricultural crisis, a food security potentially on our hands. And then Pakistan, like many other countries, was already facing difficult economic times. We just literally entered into our agreement with the IMF, hoping for the economic stability that it would bring. But unfortunately, I believe all the bases, all the figures, all the estimates that the IMF and we had made up until this point have also been washed away by these floods. So we're facing a climate catastrophe, a potential health catastrophe, a food scarcity crisis, and imminent economic difficulties.
So you need international help. Is it happening? Is it happening strongly enough, soon enough?
So we're very grateful for the assistance that we have received so far from a whole host of countries. Even if I started to try and name them, I would be unable to. But I think our message is that we're not seeking, we don't want to beg, we don't want aid, we want justice. This is a global catastrophe as a result of global action, and it requires global solutions. And what I'm happy to report is the response from the international community, as you mentioned, from the UN Secretary General, who visited himself, various other countries we're engaging with. We even met with your president, the president of France, yesterday. He was not only empathetic in expressing solidarity, but was willing to work with Pakistan to overcome this crisis, the climate aspects of it, the economic aspects of it, and very generously offered to host a conference in France before the end of the year to help us build back, but build back better and
How
more
much do you
resilient.
need?
So we don't. It is at the moment. As I mentioned, it's still an ongoing crisis or catastrophe, and there's still a damage needs assessment that needs to be done. Once the water properly recedes, which may take some months, we'll have a final figure. At the moment, the guesstimates, and these are just guesstimates, are close to $30 billion in economic loss. But every crisis creates an opportunity. And in this crisis, the opportunity is that we must build back in a more resilient way, in a greener way, where we'll have green infrastructure, green energy, climate resilient infrastructure, and create green jobs and green opportunities. That is the way forward. But right now, as we're sort of smack dab in the middle of this catastrophe, our first and foremost focus is to relief and rescue. And as we go forward and enter into the rehabilitation and rescue phase, rehabilitation and reconstruction phase, we can think about these things.
Did you get help from India?
No.
Did you ask for it?
No.
How's the relationship with India right now?
We have a long and complicated history,
to say the least.
To say the least, with India. Unfortunately, the India today is a changed India. It is no longer the secular India promised by its founding fathers for all its citizens. It is increasingly becoming Hindu supremacist India at the expense of its Christian and Muslim minorities. And that's not only the sort of Muslim minorities within India, but unfortunately in the disputed region of Jammu and Kashmir, the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, we've seen certain steps and actions that have made engagement with India untenable for us, particularly the unilateral illegal actions of August 2019, where India attempts to undermine the resolutions of the United Nations Security Council, change the boundaries of this disputed territory, and going a step further and attempting to change the Muslim majority in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir into a minority in their own land.
Is it racist policy?
All of this creates very little space for us to engage. It's absolutely a racist policy. It's an fascist, islamophobic policy. And it requires, I think, it has caused a reaction, not only within Kashmir, but all across India, where the Muslim minority, and I say minority, but it's the largest minority on the planet of Muslims in India, and they're feeling persecuted, they're feeling insecure, and this is an active policy of state. And if this is how the government of India are treating their own Muslim citizens, you can only imagine the way they are treating the Muslims of Pakistan and Kashmir.
So no engagement at all right now? No contact, nothing?
At the moment, we don't have engagement. I do believe that the younger generation of both our countries wants to see two neighbors living in peace side by side. But I just explained all the reasons why matters have been complicated recently.
I want to turn to Afghanistan. There's still no recognition of the Taliban, and Afghan girls, despite promises by the Taliban, it's been 1 year now, they haven't been able to return to school. What does it tell you about the Taliban?
So, along with the rest of the international community, it is true Pakistan has not recognized the government, or officially recognized the government in Afghanistan. There are promises that have been made by the current regime, by the interim government, to the international community and to their own people. And I think it will help. It would help the government of Afghanistan gain legitimacy and perhaps a path to recognition if they were to live up to those expectations, one of which is female education. Now, our Afghan neighbors do say that as far as primary education is concerned, they allow girls to go to primary school. As far as tertiary education is concerned, it's segregated, but they allow women to participate in tertiary education. What we're waiting for is secondary education.
But it's so you believe that recognition by the international community of the Taliban is far off, despite we've seen some kind of agreements on financial issues with the U.S.?
It's been a year's time since the transition in Kabul. And there's definitely ups and downs. There have been positive moments, but overall, we're not quite there as far as recognition is concerned. The international community would like to see the government of Afghanistan functioning as a modern state in order to, I think, reach that conclusion, and that would perhaps require them to live up to those obligations or those promises that they themselves have made, be it to ensure that their soil is not used for terrorism, to ensure that girls, women have access to education and other rights, and I think everybody also wants to see some sort of inclusive representative government in Afghanistan.
I want to turn quickly to a report that came out by the UN Human Rights Secretariat about the situation in Xinjiang. They've said that China possibly committed crimes against humanity. What do you make of this report and the situation of the Uyghur minority?
Look, I think we have to be fair and unbiased in our approach, and we can't pick and choose in such situations. This particular report, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Pakistan has made our position clear. We've released our statement. We welcome the Chinese desire to engage not only with the United Nations, but with the world community on this issue. But we had called first for the report not to be published. And once the report was published, our expectation was a more impartial approach rather than the pick and choose nature of this incident.
Just a very last issue. You've probably seen in recent days in Iran, we've seen protests after a young woman, Mahsa Amini, died at the hands of the morality police. We talked about women's rights. What do you make of those protests?
I saw the foreign minister of Iran's statements where they are going to have an inquiry into this unfortunate incident.
You trust it?
And I hope that, of course I trust. I trust the government of Iran. I trust the representatives of Iran to keep to their word. And despite living in extremely difficult circumstances, and they have sort of managed to take care of their people in their own way. As far as this incident is concerned, I think that the fact that the foreign minister of Iran has announced that he will be looking into the incident, or their government will be looking into the incident, we should at least allow for those findings to come forward.
Bilawal Bhutto, I want to thank you very much for appearing here on the France 24 interview from the United Nations in New York. Thank you very much for watching it.